Chinese Immigration by James G. Blaine. Ought we to exclude the Chinese? The question lies in my mind thus. Either the Caucasian race will possess the Pacific slope, or the Mongolian race will possess it. Give Mongolians the start today, with the keen thrust of necessity behind them, and it is entirely possible, if not demonstrable, that while we are filling up the other portions of the continent, they will occupy the great space of country between the Sierras and the Pacific coast. When gentlemen say that we admit from all other countries, where do they find the slightest parallel? The Asiatic cannot live with our population and make a homogeneous element. The idea of comparing European immigration with an immigration that has no regard to family, that does not feel in the slightest degree the humanizing and ennobling influences of the hearthstone and the fireside. There is not a peasant's cottage inhabited by a Chinaman. There is not a hearthstone, as it is found and cherished in an American home, or an English home, or a German home, or a French home, and yet you say that it is entirely safe to sit down and quietly permit that mode of life to be fastened upon our country. I have heard much of late about the cheap labor of the Chinese. I do not myself believe in cheap labor. The wealthy classes in a republic where suffrage is universal must not legislate in favor of cheap labor. Labor should not be cheap, and it should not be dear. It should have its share, and it will have its share. Then the answer is, but are not American laborers equal to Chinese laborers? I answer that question by asking another. Were not free white American laborers equal to African slaves in the South? When you tell me that the Chinaman driving out the free American laborer only proves the superiority of the Chinaman, I ask you if the African slave driving out the free white labor from the South proved the superiority of slave labor. The conditions are not unlike. The parallel is not complete, and yet it is a parallel. Chinese labor is servile labor. It is labor that comes here under a mortgage. It is labor that comes here to subsist on what the American laborer cannot subsist on. You cannot work a man who must have beef and bread in competition with a man who can live on rice. In all such conflicts and in all such struggles, the result is not to bring up the man who lives on rice to the beef and bread standard, but it is to bring down the man living on beef and bread to the rice standard. Slave labor degraded free labor. It took its respectability. It put an odious cast upon it. It throttled the prosperity of one of the fairest portions of the Union, and a worse than slave labor will throttle and impair the prosperity of a still finer and fairer section of the Union. We can choose here today whether our legislation shall be in the interests of the American free laborer or in favor of the servile laborer of China.